I just recorded a 25-minute video going over this situation, and I did not have my audio recording. So here we go again. This just shows how dedicated I am, because I think this is really important to talk about. So this is a kind of an email letter being sent from Ron Wyden of Oregon, a Democratic senator. But you'll see later on, this is not a one-party situation. So this is from him to the Attorney General of the U.S. DOJ. Dear Attorney General Garland, before we start, I want to kind of explain what we're going to talk about here. This is the Hemisphere project. The Hemisphere project is a government-funded project to access trillions of phone records and voicemail records and location records from AT&T, and any information AT&T has obtained from other agencies or other kind of subsidiaries is all provided to the government without any court-ordered subpoenas. It can be requested via law enforcement subpoenas that they can create for themselves, so it goes through under any judicial oversight. With that being said, 2 states, Texas and California, which we'll get into later, have a more complicated process to get these subpoenas, but this is affecting the majority of the Americans in the United States, and if this isn't, then this secret program that was exposed, there's many others that are spying on you in other ways, so don't worry about it, but we'll go over this. So, Dear Attorney General Garland, I write to request that you clear for public release additional information about the Hemisphere project. This is a long-running dragnet surveillance program in which the White House pays AT&T to provide all federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies the ability to request often warrantless searches of trillions of domestic phone records. So, federal, state, local, and tribal. New Mexico, tribal lands, they can request it. Miami, they can request it. U.S. Department of Justice, they can probably request it. CIA, stuff like that. It's law enforcement. Just saying. Anyone can request this, and it's often warrantless. So we'll talk about that later. In 2013, the New York Times revealed the existence of a surveillance program in which the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy pays AT&T to mine the customer's records for the benefit of federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies. According to an ONDCP slide deck, AT&T has kept its queries as part of the Hemisphere project call records going back to 1987, with 4 billion new records being added every day. So 4 billion of your records are being added to this unwarranted access, you're getting unwarranted access to 4 billion new records every day. I don't even want to think about that. The slide deck was apparently disclosed by a local law enforcement agency in response to a public information request that was published by the New York Times in 2013. The scale of the data available to and routinely searched for the benefit of law enforcement under the Hemisphere project is stunning in its scope. I'm going to trust everything I read on here because I've read other sources that support this. Second off, this is from a U.S. senator and was posted publicly by their office. So, I'm just going to assume this is fact-checked by people far more intelligent than I am. The scale of the data available and routinely searched for the benefit of law enforcement agencies under the Hemisphere project is stunning in its scope. One law enforcement official described the Hemisphere project as AT&T's super search engine and Google on steroids. According to the emails released by the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, under the Freedom of Information Act, the ONDCP slide deck and email released by the DEA also reveal that AT&T searches kept records by its wholesale division, which carries communications on behalf of other communications companies and their customers. Another slide deck released by ONDCP and published by the press in 2014 describes the specific capabilities of the Hemisphere project, including it can be used to identify alternative numbers used by a target, obtain their location data, and 2 levels of call details for one target number. So what are these 2 levels? That means that they can get not only the person they requested, but also all other information on the people who they sent these messages to or received these messages from. I don't know if that extends past fellow AT&T customers. There's no information on that. I tried to research it, but I think it's pretty unacceptable that they have to just they can just give themselves whatever subpoena that they want on this one person. Self-produced subpoena. They don't need to go over any judicial oversight. They can get this guy's information. And with that subpoena for him, they can get the information for everyone else he's talking to. I think that's crazy. And the reason this is possible is because it goes through a couple of pathways that make it avoid privacy investigations by the Department of Justice, and that's why this letter is being sent to the Department of Justice, because obviously this is something that needs to be looked into. This was from 2023. I didn't hear about it at the time when these letters came out. I'm assuming many other people didn't, so it's important that we talk about this now, especially with the fears of rights going on right now in the country. And before we continue any further, I'm not party affiliated. I have never voted on party lines. I don't identify as anything. I think that I'm here to provide everybody with information, and what you do with that information is up to you. I'll provide my opinion, but my opinion is just that. I think that my opinion is pretty central in view. I think that I hope for the best for everyone. So anyways, this is how we're going to move on now. The Hemisphere project has been supported by regular funding from the White House ONDCP since 2009, according to the attached undated white paper that the ONDCP provided to my office on October 27th, 2022. And we'll look at this paper. The same document reveals that the White House funding for this program was suspended by the Obama administration in 2013, the same year the program was exposed by the press, but continued with other federal funding under a new generic sounding name, the DAS, or Data Analytical Services. ONDCP funding for the surveillance program was quietly resumed by the Trump administration in 2017, paused again in 2021, and the first year of the Biden administration, then quietly was restarted again in 2022. So, this is not like a party thing, I don't believe. The information came out at the start of the Obama administration, so I can see why they would have, to save face, stopped it. As soon as Trump came into power, though, he resumed it, and then Biden paused it, and then started it again under the DAS in 2022, which we'll go into a little bit later. So I don't think this is a party thing. I don't think any party is responsible for this, and this is very much a bipartisan issue where both parties need to come together and just fucking squash it, and there is bipartisan efforts, which we'll get into later. Although the Hemisphere project is paid for with federal funds, they are delivered to AT&T through an obscure grant program, enabling this program to skip an otherwise mandatory federal privacy review. If the funds came directly from a federal agency such as the DEA, Hemisphere would have been subjected to mandatory privacy impact assessments conducted by the Department of Justice Office of Privacy and Civil Liberties, the findings of which would be made public. Very important to understand that this is purposefully being curtailed so they don't have to provide any information to the public. Instead, the ONDCP provides funding for the program to the Houston high-intensity drug trafficking area. So when I mention HIDTA, just remember this is a area that is funded by the ONDCP, which is funded by the White House, basically. The HIDTAs distribute federal anti-drug law enforcement grants to state and local agencies and are governed by a board made up entirely of federal, state, and local law enforcement officials. So it's also important to note that this board who's giving these funds out to give to AT&T are also the same people who are requesting the records, and the people who are requesting the records are also giving themselves authorization as well. So they are curtailing any judicial oversight, So this law enforcement officer, let's say they are one of the people who are part of the board, they can request that requested information with their own subpoena that they made, and then approve the funding with their own vote. That level of corruption is crazy. ONDCP, I guess not corruption, but for me it feels like it's corrupt. That's a corrupt way to obtain information. The ONDCP provided my staff with an undated white paper describing the program and its historical funding levels, but directed all questions about Hemisphere to the Houston HIDTA. So we're going to go over all this though. Basically, it's a single law enforcement or a single AT&T analyst located in Atlanta, Georgia that's processing all these requests. So they can contact the analyst directly with any request with varying authorization requirements. They confirm that federal and state law enforcement agencies can request a Hemisphere search with a subpoena, which is a directive that many law enforcement agencies can issue themselves. So most law enforcement agencies can issue themselves besides in California and Texas, where a court order is required. Great. So in these two states, with this specific program that's still secret, and we only know so much information, but apparently, according to HIDTA officials, who are the ones providing the funding for this, and oversee it, Texas and California, court order is required. They also explained that Hemisphere searches are not required to be in support of drug-related investigations, which is something that people were arguing before. This has nothing to do with drug relation. This can be used for anything, which we'll go into later. This can be used for some LEO wanting to stalk his ex-wife. Like, that's been used, I believe, from what I've read. For the past year, I've urged the DOJ to release dozens of pages of material related to the Hemisphere project, which it provided to my office in 2019. This information has been designated law enforcement sensitive, which is meant to restrict its public release. I have serious concerns about the legality of this surveillance program and the materials provided by the Department of Justice contain troubling information that would justifiably outrage many Americans and members of Congress. Just this little overview is outraging me a little bit, and obviously, hopefully, anyone who's reading this will kind of be called to action in this regard. I'm doing my part by spreading this, and I'm obviously, publicly against this, but we're not going to go over all that. The public interest in an informed debate about government surveillance far outweighs the need to keep this information secret. To the end, I urge you to promptly clear for public release the material described in Appendix B. Thank you for your attention to this important matter. If you have any questions about this request, please contact Chris Segoen in my office. Ron Wyden, U.S. Senator. So, again, this was sent to the director of the Attorney General of the DOJ, and the director right here, I believe, of the ONDCP, which is, we'll talk about him later, but he's Rahul Gupta. His name will come up again later. All right, so this kind of talks about the services that they provide, determining whether phones associated with international targets of investigation in the United States, linking multiple devices and phone numbers to one person, getting a greater view of this person and what they've been doing, where they've been, who they've been calling. It's good in creating a idea of who this person is and what they're doing. This also helps identifying devices that have SIM cards substituted or replaced, identifying and deconflicting international telephone numbers associated with targets. So it's kind of all come together in identifying a greater picture of who is doing these calls, where they are going. It's basically a way to track people. I think that this is very important to have. Personally, I am a supporter of this being provided to law enforcement agencies through a judicially overseen process. So either a grand jury subpoena, a criminal, not criminal, but a warrant provided by a judge, things like that. I think it's awesome this information is ready. I think some people will not want this information to be collected at all, but I'm sorry, that's not a reality. What we can fight for, though, is the fact that we've all agreed in this country to follow these laws, and if we are suspected by a judge or a jury that they're probably doing these legal activities, and we want to get more information to bring them to justice, I think it's important this information is there. But this is without any judicial oversight in 49 out of the 51 states, so sickening. Under the terms of the agreement, the telecommunications provider requires legally compelling authority, which, like we talked about earlier, applicable to state laws, so like we just talked about. Currently, the ONDCP awards funding to support DAS to the Houston HIDTA, which engages in a contractual agreement with the telecoms provider. So they have a contract. They undertake routine audits to ensure that the service is used appropriately and strictly limited to counter-narcotics investigations. But they also mentioned that it is not only used for illegal drug trafficking, which was mentioned earlier. So a bit of an interesting take there. And this talks about their funding, which we talked about. It's just both parties are funding this, and this was continued to be funded secretly anyway. So it's pretty insane. And like I said, this is a bipartisan effort to kind of bring this to light. The next day, we have a letter from Andy Biggs, who's a Republican congressman. Dear Director Gupta, on November 1st, 2023, you published an op-ed in the Washington Post calling on Congress to reauthorize Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. I think this is what was used for the CIA to investigate on people, like this kind of legal spying, but it's fucked up. In this op-ed, you advocated for Congress to reauthorize a controversial spying tool and opposed common sense bipartisan reforms, such as requiring the government to obtain a warrant before reading Americans' emails and accessing their location data. So obviously, the director of the ONDCP does not care about your rights at all. Fuck Director Gupta, honestly. Like, screw you, dude. He does not care at all about obtaining a warrant, which makes sense considering we're going to talk about it. But his office has for more than a decade quietly funded another dragnet surveillance program that has swept up information about millions of law-abiding Americans without meaningful congressional or judicial oversight. So it's pretty ridiculous that he is asking for. I mean, it makes sense that he's asking for more spying tools. This guy's fucking crazy. Details recently disclosed in a letter from Senator Ron Wyden. So we talked about this. Basically, it just goes over the letter, talks about it. And he says that is why it is critical that Congress enact the civil liberties protections outlined in the bipartisan bicameral Government Surveillance Reform Act. The Government Surveillance Reform Act, which we will show you guys real quick. I researched it already, but whoops. Here we go. Basically, warrantless queries for communications is what I was looking for the United States persons and persons located in the United States. So pretty important here. You need to have judicial oversight. Judicial oversight as shown in, the bill. So anyways, it's very important that we show that this is illegal. This goes against the civil protections outlined in the Government Surveillance Reform Act. So pretty crazy, illegal spying. Americans are justifiably outraged that the Biden White House is buying their data without a court order. Not just Biden's White House. Obviously, this is the Republican senator, wants to call it the current administration, but this is also done by the Trump administration, is done by the Trump administration, and has been done by the Obama administration during the start of their, presidency. But you call that an inherited problem for the Obama administration, but at least for the Biden and the Trump administrations, this is a choice. And has some requests, which I think are valid. You can stop and read them if you'd like, but I'm going to talk while you read them. Basically, the whole idea of this is that this is a bipartisan issue that has already been ruled on in the past, has been passed bipartisanly in Congress, that there needs to be oversight for these kind of queries. It needs to be judicial and it needs to be warranted. And this program is neither. It's important that people are understanding of this so that, positive change in regards to all of our rights can be done. I don't think that this has anything to do with parties. I don't think any one party is kind of conclusively responsible for this. This is something that is just unacceptable, and that should be done, taken care of immediately. Another article I read also, I read a few cases in which it was used for personal acts of sort of like spying on significant others and stuff by law enforcement agencies, and that's why they have those audits. But it's like, if you needed a warrant for that, that information would not have been accessed, and that person's privacy would not have been breached, because no judge is going to give that warrant out to this, or this subpoena out to this law enforcement officer trying to stalk his ex-wife or whatever. I don't know. I think that this has so many violations to our rights, and I think this is a common issue. And this isn't as good as my first take, but we take it.